Communicating in geometry is like speaking 3 languages. Why is that, you'll ask me? That is because we use words to describe the objects that we work with, which sometimes we write in shorthand using symbol notation, and other times we express the same information through diagrams. Regardless to what kind of language is used, we have to be able to translate from diagrams to words, from words to diagrams, from symbols to words or to the diagrams. So it's constantly working with 3 different representations. So if we are falling behind on recognizing symbols or reading diagrams, then we will end up with unnecessary complications in understanding what's going on. So let's prevent that from happening by studying how we can use symbols, words, and diagrams to understand what's in front of us. The first undefined element of geometry is a line, and from middle and elementary school you might remember diagrams looking like this. What I want you to notice is that to refer to this line on the diagram we use a lowercase m. So using a capital M or using a capital M with a dot would not give a name to this line. That would be an incorrect diagram for something that we call in words line M. In symbols, we will use exactly the same statement, line M, lowercase m, and it will be incorrect to write in symbols something like this, where capital M is used. You also might a slightly different diagram of a line, for example, like this one. We will refer to this sketch as line ED or line DE. It is possible because line, by definition, is an object that has no beginning and no end. It's an unlimited number of points that extend in both directions indefinitely. What we cannot say about this object is line D and E. It's also incorrect to use a diagram for line DE or line ED where there are no points, or when letters, even if it's just one letter, are not capitalized. In symbols, the same object will be written as DE, where on top there is this object that resembles a line, something with no beginning, no end. And again, it would be okay to refer to the same object as ED. But we may not be using lowercase letters when we write line DE in symbols. In high school, the objects, even if it's a line, will look slightly more complicated. So now you see 3 collinear points. How would we refer to this object? The simplest form would be line DCE or line ECD, since, again, the line has no beginning and no end. But you also can refer to this line by just 2 letters. You could name it line DC or line CD, since it would go exactly the same way. You also could name it as line CE or EC because, again, it will go the same way. It will go the same way even if you name this object as line D, E. So all of these are the possibilities of identifying this object still correctly, even if I use three-letter notation, but on top I must use this symbol of a line. Just be careful, don't be sloppy, do not use lowercase letters, and this is very important. You have to make sure that the letters are listed in the order they appear. In my case, C is between D and E. If you put them out of order, that would be a different object and would be an incorrect name for the diagram on your right. How would I write the same information in words? Well, I would say line D, C, E or E, C, D or any other forms of lines with two-letter notation. When you use two-letter, there is no way you can make an arrow in their order. But be careful with the three-letter notation. It would be incorrect to call it line DEC because E, once again, is out of order. You cannot name this line as line DC and E. And one more thing. Be careful with the diagrams. Don't be sloppy. If you use lowercase letters or forget to put the dots, that is also not the correct way to give this information using a diagram. Next object, rays. Rays are subsets or portions of a line that actually have the beginning, which strangely is called the end point, and then it continues indefinitely in one direction. So if I had a ray, like on this diagram, I would have to call it ray DE. The order in the name would be very important since it has to reflect who exactly is the end point, where everything begins. In my case, it's D, so when I write the name of this object in symbols, I must start with D. D is the end point. This is where the ray starts, and then it keeps moving in the direction of E. Notice that on top of the symbols, I would have to use this arrow pointing from left to right only. That resembles a ray, an object with the beginning and with no end. There are several ways of using that symbol incorrectly. Here they are. You may not be using lowercase letters. You may not be misplacing the end point. End point must be in the beginning. And you may not be correcting yourself by reversing the arrow on top when you realize that you misplaced your D. So arrow goes only from left to right. Please notice that if on the diagram your ray DE goes from right to left, you still will have to make sure that the endpoint is named D. It would be incorrect to have the diagram where endpoint is named E if the object you mean is ray DE. And of course, it also would be incorrect even if you reverse the direction. Of course, you have to remember not to use lowercase letters as well. When it comes to using words describing these elements in writing, we will be saying ray DE. We cannot name it ray D and E, and we cannot say ray ED. Now, this is even a more interesting case. 3 letters used for array. So if you mean that you're working with the ray named ray DCA, then you also have to recognize that ray DC has the same beginning and goes indefinitely in the same direction as ray DCA. Ray DA will start at D and also will go in the same direction, passing through A. And because these 3 points are collinear, when you say any of these 3 statements, they actually represent the same object. Be careful not to write the name out of order. In this case, C is between A and D, but the endpoint is A, which is wrong. Whereas in this situation, the endpoint is D, but A is placed between D and C, not as it is on the diagram. It certainly would be wrong to name the ray by one of the letters, even if that letter is the endpoint. Well, let's look at how this ray could be named in symbols. Keep in mind what we've already discussed for describing it in words. On top, we will use a symbol of array. We will show capital letters that reflect who the beginning is and in what direction it moves and who is the letter in between. You also could name it as 2-letter notation, as long as D is the endpoint. It would be incorrect, though, to use lowercase letters or a single letter to name this ray, or, of course, letters out of order. Let's take at this situation. What do you think? Is it the same object as ray DCA? Yes, it is. The letters are going in the order DCA, where the endpoint starts at D and goes through C and A indefinitely. And this picture is exactly like the first one, only it doesn't seem to begin at D, but only at first sight. Because we do have a point at D. When you see a picture like this, and you're talking about ray DCA, you're supposed to consider only the highlighted part. And you kind of ignore the portion that happened before point D. Please notice, any of these diagrams is not what ray DCA is. Think of the reasons on your own. Wrong endpoint, lowercase letters. Point C is supposed to be between D and A, and array should not be named by one letter. I'm going to mention one more important fact. Let's say that you're reading about ray CA. I want to make sure that you understand that this means that you do have this element on this diagram. It's just that it starts at C and goes indefinitely through A. And whatever happened before before C is kind of not a part of that diagram. So that object is kind of hidden in a bigger ray. And in words, of course, we can say ray CA. segments. Simplest case, segment AD. Well, since segment is a part of a line, a subset of a line that has the beginning and the end, it doesn't matter whether the beginning is on the left or on the right. Both of these points are considered to be endpoints. And so this object is also segment AD or segment DA. In words, we would name them segment DA or segment AD. We will not be able to say segment D and A. That would be incorrect. If we were to use symbols, we would write it in a way DA and AD with a symbol of a segment on top. Notice how that symbol looks like. We would not be able to use lowercase letters. They are not used on diagrams either. It would be also wrong to have your diagram without dots for A and D. And for a high school situation, of course, your diagrams will be more interesting. So in this case, we work with the segment A, C, D, which I could name as D, C, A. In this third situation, if I say I'm interested in segment D, C, A, it would mean that I'm looking only at the span between the endpoints D and A. If I were to write what its measure is, I would use this bracket just to make sure that nobody is considering the parts to the left and to the right from these endpoints. But these are kind of facts that we're already familiar with. So we will use the symbol of a segment like a bar on top as we name it. Again, the order left to right, right to left would not matter, but you must make sure C is between letters D and A. Let's consider these examples of incorrect usage of symbols. In first case, they are lowercase. And in the second case, D is between A and C, which is not our situation. By the way, we could use two-letter notation for the same segment, because if we said segment AD or DA, that would be exactly the same segment as segment DCA. And just like in the situation of arrays, if you have somebody naming an object segment DC, you have to be careful because they are referring to the span of the length between D and C right here, and not to the entire length of the segment that we considered a few seconds ago. So that would probably affect how you solve your problem also. Okay, so what kind of diagrams would be incorrect? Well, if you don't have dots, if you have letters out of order in comparison with the name of that segment, or if you have lowercase letters, even if a couple of them are lowercase, that still is considered to be incorrect. And in words, you're very familiar now from the example of lines and rays that we cannot refer to a segment as segment A, C, and D, because it's just a list of points, not what we're discussing here. cannot say segment ADC. Do you know why? D is in the wrong place. And if somebody names segment AC, you have to be aware that they are referring to an object on the same diagram, which is not at all the same as segment DCA. When they say segment AC, they are referring only to a portion between endpoints A and C. Well, that seems to be all.